Week 36. Last week was interesting. I was supposed to hook up the presentation layer of my home screen to the data and the domain layers. That is done, but with errors. And in the process of trying to fix the errors, I realized I needed to put in a proper logger. So I actually spent the vast majority of my last week putting in Kermit, which is a Kotlin multi-platform compliant logger that's still in active development by TouchLabs, I believe. Open source, MIT license, good deal. And putting that in actually took a little while because I made a very interesting mistake in using Claude to help me put the stuff in, and I'll explain that a little down the line. Well, let me first touch on the problem, the errors that I'm seeing in my current implementation of the hookup between my view model as well as the backend layers. The database operation would succeed in the when you're trying to add something through the UI to the database would actually succeed, and the record would show, and the operation would return successful. However, in the UI, it's saying that, no, it failed, and please try again. So somewhere along the line, I don't know in what layer the problem is, the correct response from the database somehow got interpreted by the app as something that's unsuccessful. And as you would imagine, with problems like these, you need to, you could either step through and hope that all the coroutines would run when you're stepping through the problem, or you can use a logger. And that's why I put in the logger. Initially, I was using print statements, and every time I have to put the print statements in and then remove the print statements because it caused my tests to fail. And I was like, okay, let me put the logger in. I'm going to put the logger in. So logger is put in, and I haven't actually used the log. I know that it's working because I can see the log in my logcat, but I haven't actually used that information to fix the problem. I think the problem should be fairly straightforward so long as I have the log to look at. So I would spend a little bit of time at least next week to fix the problem before I move on to other tasks. But the mistake I made last week putting in Kermit, by the way, they called it Kermit the Log. I can't get into the heads of those people who came up with those names, but I would imagine that at least some of them came up with those names and got approved, and then they sort of just sit there in their rooms or in their cubicles in their office just giggling at the name that they gave their product. Kermit the Log. Well, in any case, the mistake I made using Claude's help to put in Kermit is that I actually relied on subagents. And this is I've come to realize not a good practice. Subagents are actually very helpful in terms of helping you speed up routine operations that you do in a repository. Let's say that you already have a form somewhere else in the app, and you need this form placed in a different part of the app with different string resources and mildly different behavior. You can use the agents to do that for you. You tell the agents to look for repo convention and the way that it's currently done in repo, and then so that I can actually very cleverly and intelligently copy the implementation into a new area. That works great. And the benefit of using agents, of course, one of the biggest benefits is that you get to save your context, right? So in your master agent, you don't have to compact once every 15 minutes and then experience the lossy compression from compaction. So that's agents. That's great. The problem I was running into was sort of like what the doctors might experience in a sort of a diagnostic situation. Like if you're trying to do an exploratory surgery, you don't know what's going on, but you need to open somebody up and look everywhere for evidence of something going wrong, and you don't know what you're going to find. In that case, using an agent isn't, at least from my experience, isn't the most productive. Reason being that, when you fire off an agent from your master agent, the master agent essentially takes their hands off, right? The agent goes and does everything in its own context, in its own environment. And currently with the implementation of Claude Code, you don't really get to see what happens in the agent's little mind. So when the agent comes back with a report, this is like the information that's presented to you coming from the subagent's context is greatly compressed. So you don't get, you don't know what it did. You don't know the details that it found, but didn't report to you that might actually be highly relevant, especially when you're trying to put in a new framework, a new library that would actually break something in the existing code base. So I ran into a situation where an agent keeps repeating a cycle when it comes to implementing a component, and it would do it wrong the first time, and then it would think, oh no, I should do it this way, and then switch to the other implementation, and then, oh, it didn't work, let me switch back, and it was just like ping pong, and that wasn't very productive. So what I discovered was that I needed to actually, in this case, I have to rely solely within one master agent, and I of course used Opus for the longer context capability without degradation. And I followed all the thought process that I proposed, and then I corrected some of the mistakes as they are happening by using the escape key to cancel the operation and tell it, oh, you did this wrong, you shouldn't do this, you should look at this and you should look at that. And that was eventually what actually made the implementation successful. So I suppose the lesson learned here is, when you're trying to put in something that's not routine, don't use agents unless you have a lot of confidence in your agents. And at this point, I don't. Take the helm, at the very least, guide the master agent when it comes to implementation. And a lot of times you would have to exit out, tell it to do something different, or worst case, I think there's one part of it where I had to go into the code, I made the changes, and I tell it to Claude, okay, I fixed it, okay, just don't touch this, move on. So yeah, last week, in summary, I hooked up the view models for my home screen to the backend layers, but there are errors. And as a result, I also implemented Kermit the Log. And next week, I want to use Kermit the Log to diagnose the problem, fix the problem I'm currently seeing with regards to the UI reporting an error when the backend operation actually succeeded. And if I can get more time past that, next week, I'll probably start polishing my UI, but fixing the problem is my first priority for next week. That's it for this week. I'll see you next week.